Hi everybody, I'm Rick Clow. I'm the BPM on Blogger, and a couple of years ago, Dan's wife sent me an email when Dan had self-published a novel and asked if I would read it. I had a few readers on my blog, and and was happy to read a techie novel without really any expectation of how good or bad it might be. Fortunately for me, it was not only a great tech novel, it was the best I had ever read. And I proceeded to introduce Dan to a couple of folks, and things kind of snowballed from there. About a year later, Wired magazine wrote about Dan's underground sensation that was kind of capturing the imagination of a lot of geeks. And soon thereafter, kind of the best possible thing happened, which was Penguin Books bought the rights to both the book and the sequel, which I hope is coming out like next week. And I'm sure we'll hear more about that. And Paramount has bought the movie rights. The hardback came out a couple of weeks ago. It's now on the New York Times bestseller list, and it has just opened to rave reviews. Dan and I have become very good friends. It's been just an absolute pleasure over the last couple of years to kind of follow his success and track from trying to get people to read about the book and hear about the book to now being a very much in demand novelist with a breakout success on his hands. So very excited to welcome him to Google. We're going to keep this very informal, but have just asked Dan to talk a little bit about the process of writing the book, where the idea for Daemon came from, the process of now having it be a major release on a major publisher's imprint, and answer our questions about the technology involved for those of you who have read it. I'm sure you'll share my feelings that it's a pretty scary, albeit fairly realistic take on what could happen, and then answer maybe some questions about when that sequel's coming out. Dan.
Thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Thank you guys for coming out. I really appreciate it. I'm thrilled to be here. Actually, I'm sort of here to say thank you to all of you. I can tick through all of the things that Google made possible on this book, including the success of this book. I don't think it would have been possible without Google. I'm just going to talk for about 15, 20 minutes about that, also about the process of self-publishing and how I came up with the story. I don't typically do readings because I'm not a thespian, and I don't want to butcher my characters. I think some authors are great at that. I'm not one of them. But first of all, let me talk a little bit about the parts of the book that Google made possible. When we self-published this book, Michelle and I, originally, you have to go out and reach the world somehow and be found. And of course, this is not news to you guys. This is what you do. Let me think. Google AdWords, Google Analytics, Google Alerts, search term. I chose my pen name, Leonid Zeros, for the self-published book because it was a great Google search term. I might be the first author ever to have done that, but a lot of gamers got that immediately. They reversed the characters. It's just what gamers tend to do. So that was also a defining thing. But I would own, well, you said like the first 15 pages of Google search results. So if anybody wanted to find me, they could find me immediately. And that is, once again, thanks to you guys. I think it would have been damn near impossible to get noticed without a central search hub like Google making that possible. So my personal thanks to you all. What you do made a very big difference in my life. So I want to thank you for that. Now, this is my first novel. I'm not a professional writer, although I guess I am now. But it worked out very well. I originally wrote this. I wanted to write a nonfiction book called The Case for Inefficiency. That it was kind of addressing some of my concerns about the fragility of our modern infrastructure. But I thought about it and realized nobody would read that because it's going to be, oh, good, you'd read it. I'd sell one. And I could probably convince my wife to buy it too. But I decided instead to write a book, a thriller, that didn't pull any punches. I didn't want to dumb it down. And I thought I'd read enough techno thrillers that sort of ticked me off, You'd read them, you'd say, that's ridiculous. And I wanted to really stay to real technology, combine existing technologies in new ways, And once again, this was coming, my feelings about this book that made me want to write it came from the 17 years I was a systems analyst designing relational database systems and algorithms for load balancing, deployment networks, things like that for big corporations. And the trend I'd seen over the last decade or so was increasing centralization and uniformity, and also a real push to automate things. And of course, this was made possible by the web, and it was cost effective and highly efficient. But it also increases, bless you, it also increases the susceptibility of these networks to shocks, sudden shocks. And that was really the driving reason for me to write this book. I felt that most people in the street were not technical enough to really understand what these issues were. And the goal of this book was to try to make it an exciting story that would bring people through all of the issues, I think, so that once they were done reading it, they'd read a good story, but also would know a bit more about the underpinnings of the modern world. And that was my goal. Hopefully I succeeded in that. But for those, who's read the book, by the way? I don't want to put anybody on the spot. So, okay, I have about a third of the folks. So for those of you who haven't read it, I'll give you the high concept that I gave the Hollywood folks. That seemed to work okay. It is the story of a highly successful online game designer who creates a program that monitors the web for the appearance of his own obituary. And when that appears, this program activates and cascades in activating other programs that begin to tear apart the systems supporting the modern world. It's not a comedy, obviously. And once again, I didn't use a story where there's this super intelligent computer. And one of the characteristics of this story is that these are fairly dumb bots, web bots, that are reacting to this. And I think that's one of the big changes from most of these stories about computers taking over the world is one of my chief concerns is that we can create systems that are not self-aware that can nonetheless corral us pretty well as a society, and also without us even knowing it. Because a lot of people in daily lives, they do what the screen tells them. So that was one of my concerns. Now, let's see, I'm going to flip through my notes here. I did not write this book to stoke fear. In some of the interviews I've done, that is the first question, like, oh, are we all going to die? And that's not why I wrote the book. I wrote the book to try to inform the public about these issues so that we can make some changes. I'm very optimistic about technology. Obviously, I'm a technologist. I think there's great things on the horizon, as long as we're aware of some potential pitfalls. And I really hope I'm wrong about all this. I hope this does not move to the nonfiction section anytime soon. And I think when the sequel comes out, you will see that I'm actually very optimistic about the future. Now, how did I get this book published? As Rick indicated, I self-published it initially. There's a bit of a stigma to that. Obviously, I tried to get this published the mainstream way. I sent out to 48 agents, and I know the number exactly. I wrote customized letters to each one of them, query letters, and I got 3 to write me back, and they indicated that the book was too long. The logistics of the modern publishing distribution business are that they don't want a first-time author to be over 90,000 words, because if you make it longer than that, it will take up more than one slot in the retail channel. That's just the reality of the business. So I didn't want to shorten it, because it was 140,000 words the way I wrote it, and so that would be a good 40% cut. That was too much. So I did self-publish it with a company called Lightning Source, and I don't know if anybody's ever heard of that, but there's a number of different print-on-demand services that give you access to Ingram distribution network throughout the world, well, throughout North America and the UK anyway. And it was a surprisingly easy process. That just left us the marketing of the book, which is a huge task, I would indicate. And Michelle came up with a great grassroots campaign. We did not spam everybody about the existence of this book. What we did was we chose about 24 people who were people, bloggers, tech journalists, people who I'd read and whose work I was familiar with. And we approached them personally, and it was a much more scaled down, a bit labor intensive, because you had to write personal letters to these folks, indicating you knew who they were and what they did, and that you really thought that they would enjoy your book. And we got a great return rate, and Rick Clow was one of those. Bless you again. Virus going around. What that enabled us to do was to leverage those people. They started handing it to other people. And as late as probably a year into this process, we had only sold about 150 books. And for anybody who has a book in them, I know it's amazing. I think back and it's like it was a long, long hill to go up. But it really started snowballing after a certain point. And suddenly we realized we were not the ones pushing it. It was starting to accelerate on its own. And that was after the Wired article came out. But that was fully a year later. So for anybody who wants to self-publish a book, don't be discouraged if after a great deal of effort you've only sold a few hundred books, because I believe the average is about 150 for a self-published book. The critical point for us was at about 3,500 copies, which occurred, I think, several months after the Wired article. Buzz was building on the web, and that was really when the floodgates opened and mainstream publishers came to me, Hollywood came to me, and I suddenly found myself in a very good situation. For those of you who are very supportive of self-publishing and the grassroots idea, sort of a democratizing literature, some of those folks were a little upset at me that I chose a mainstream contract at that point, but I will say that mainstream publishing really does have a role still, even though print-on-demand technology is out there, and that's because to get a book in stores, the logistics of that really requires a major organization right now. And until there's a time where there's print-on-demand machines in every Barnes & Noble and Borders and so forth, I don't see that changing. So I do see self-publishing as a new farm system for literature, where instead of sending your manuscript into agents, you might self-publish. And these agencies would instead monitor all these self-published books to see which ones are rising. And I think that's much more of a meritocracy. Everybody get a chance to say what they want to say. And if they find an audience, they can establish that they have an audience, they will get published. And I firmly believe that. That was certainly my experience. So I guess the buzzword there is crowdsourcing the book selection process. The very first job, by the way, I had out of college was at a publishing company. It was Dodd Mead in New York. And I worked a slush pile. And they would just bring truckloads of these manuscripts in every day. I know how much work that is. As a matter of fact, I used to write the flap copies of nonfiction books. I wrote the flap copy for Psychic Cats, which was my first one. So you've read it. That's good. Also, Secrets of Successful Insurance Sales. That was another big favorite. But it was helpful for me to work in the publishing industry because I could see behind that curtain. I didn't take rejection personally. Also, self-publishing does more closely align your awareness of publishing realities with that of a publisher. Because when I started talking to the mainstream publishers, they were, I think, a little shocked that I was realistic about what was necessary. So that's another thing I would recommend about self-publishing is as an artist, you have some different priorities, but they can be tempered somewhat by the realities of self-publishing and trying to print that book and make it available at a profit so that you don't lose money on every book you sell. Now, that's really about all I have to say on that. I'm very happy to take any questions anybody has at this point. Erica.
Can you talk a little bit about your work as the IT security consultant? And
Sure. See, that's something that I get from some of these interviews. The question was, can I talk a bit about my work as an IT security consultant? I wasn't an IT security consultant. If you look at some of the interviews, what I was is I designed relational database systems and algorithms. Yeah. Part of that is securing your systems. If I put code into a major corporation that becomes a mission-critical system, I definitely don't want any holes in it. So that was my exposure to security. When I created systems, I would often, at the resistance of the client, spend time securing it. Because you know how that goes. They create something and they want it in place, and I would say, well, hang on, we got to secure this. Some clients were great about that. Other clients really wanted to get things moving quickly. So that's why I became aware of it. Because if they didn't already have somebody focusing on the whole security picture, I would make sure my part was okay. So that's where that came from. Anybody else? Any questions at all? Yes?
Did you look at the Creative Commons? Why did you not choose it?
Yeah, that's where I would have gone. The question is, did I look at Creative Commons licensing? Had I not been able to sell this book, I would have done that. I was determined to get the book out there. I also wanted to be able to make a good play at this. It seemed like a good time for me to start thinking of a change. So I wanted to see if I could succeed commercially with it first. Had I not done so, I would have put it out there with a Creative Commons license, definitely. So please don't be timid. I'm very timid and I'm standing up here, so please ask some questions, feel free. Anybody? Erica.
Were any of the characters in the book based on anybody you know?
Yeah, that's another question I get. Were any of the characters based on people I know? Thankfully not, because otherwise you get pigeonholed by somebody, and I'm not a good liar, and then they'd be like, why would you portray me like that? The closest I would get is the character of Ross, who is a composite of a person that I met, who was probably the most gifted coder I'd ever met in my life, could look at a screen of code and then walk across the room and reproduce it on his screen to make, a point. Really sharp guy. But the other folks really, I think, are just symbolic individuals, and I steered clear, especially of portraying anybody in my family. That seems like a really bad idea. So, anybody else? Yes?
With the movie deal, are you concerned about the dumbing down of the technology?
Yeah, wow, we are videotaping this, aren't we? No, I'm not as concerned. It's one of the reasons why I chose the folks I did. It's Walter Parks is the producer. He was the co-writer of War Games, fairly technical guy. He takes the story from the characters and understands generally what it's about. There were other producers who were interested in it. I don't think that they were approaching it from that point of view. They were approaching it more as a big action picture only. And if I'm being unfair, that was the perception I had at the time. And I think Walter, Walter Parks and Laurie McDonald, his wife, that they really get the story. The other thing is they're involving me in it to the extent that we're sitting down and talking. I mean, I'm not writing the script, I'm not a screenwriter, but they are at least asking me what I think about things. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it that way, but that's a good start, and I'm pretty confident they're going to do a good job. So, this is a new experience. It's pretty cool. There was another one I had. Rick.
Yeah, so not so much related to the book, but I think kind of building off of it, the thing that resonated for me very early on was how well you explained technical subjects without sounding technical. So, I mean, my favorite of those scenes was when Ross is in the hotel and the demon is hacking into the unsecured web server of the hotel to get his identity, and he's desperately trying to shut the computer down before that happens because he recognizes that that's happening. It's been fun in reading some of the reviews of people who are not technical, that they appreciate how well they understand all the moving parts of the book.
Which amazes me. I'm glad, because I was trying to do that, but the fact that I appear to have pulled it off amazes me.
Well, and that's, I guess, my question is, at Google, we deal with a lot of people who are not particularly technical, and it's incumbent upon us to explain what we do and how we do it to this audience. Is there a process you go through where you try and put yourself in the shoes of someone else?
Yeah, and I think this comes from my work, actually, because part of what I would do is serve as a liaison very often between coders or teams of coders and corner office guys. And I think having an English literature background, I guess I have somewhat of a gift for gab. I'm able to translate between these people and try to relate to these decision makers what the issues are. It's what I was trying to do, and I'm still amazed when folks who have absolutely no technical background get in touch with me and say, "Oh, thank you so much for doing this. Now I understand online games, and what my kids are doing. I get it now." Also enthusiasm. I had a lot of enthusiasm for portraying it. This book really was a labor of love in that sense. So I took the time to figure it out. If you saw all the words that did not make it on the page, it's several orders of magnitude. And that, I'll go into the sequel a little here. This originally was going to be one long story. And I think it was on page 1135, and I'm like, we got to tone this down. Because you're trying to sell a 450-page self-published novel. Imagine trying to sell a 1,100 or 1,000-page one. It just wouldn't work. So I chopped it in two, restructured it a bit, and the second book really is a very integral part of the first.
The sequel is already written and ready to go?
It was mostly written, and then I was going to release it last November, and then when Dutton, which is an imprint of Penguin, they picked up the book, of course, they reset the clock, so they released the hardcover, and they always wait a year because they want to do a paperback of the hardcover. So yeah, I apologize to anybody who read the book. It's on my website. I said it's coming out in November, but they changed it, and I realized that. But the one good thing about that is, you might have noticed there's been a few changes out in the world recently. Some of the things that seemed outlandish that I had in the sequel are now like, news from a month ago. So it gives me a chance to respond to that somewhat. I do think most of it will hold up very well in terms of technological looking forward. Some of the social circumstances that I had originally had in the sequel, I now have a chance to update them, which is good. But yeah, I'm very, very eager to get that out there, and I do feel very bad for those people who read this book like a year and a half ago, or like, dude, where is it? Well, anyway, any other questions? Yes?
So for me, the part of the book which required the greatest suspension of disbelief was, I consider myself extremely fortunate if I could write a one-page program which would run unattended in production without me ever touching the game.
Yes, yes.
Do you think
This is what I say to that. The question, I don't know if we have audio on the questions, but it was basically, if I can paraphrase you, do you expect me to believe this rather large system runs without a single bug? And how many people died in beta testing? The answer to that is I actually had scenes and chapters where, and I'm going to be careful not to give away some of the story to those who haven't read it, where somebody would go to interact with the demon and it would fail. Because it's so distributed that we look at a bell curve and all we need is that sweet spot in the middle, a critical mass of people succeeding through it. But it really disrupted the story. It undermined it. I know what you're saying. It would have to fail in so many ways. I think it will become more clear in the sequel how it heals itself, how it reacts to failure. But that is how I envisioned it, that there are failures, but you didn't see them in the book. And if that sounds like a weaselly answer, that was actually what I was thinking. So was there a particular point in it that you thought was just the complexity of it and the fact that it ran well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
The movie publisher would be interested in making that deleted scenes part of the DVD when it comes out with those scenes in it.
You know what? I love that. That's a great idea. I'll bring it up to them. We'll see if they go for that. But it's the old, hey, wait a minute. I did what you said. Blue screen of death. Yeah, maybe. That would be funny, actually.
If you don't go for that, would you consider putting those up on your webpage?
Well, I wouldn't do the production of it, but, oh, you mean the text? The text. That's interesting. Yeah, I'd have to clean it up. But I promise I'll deliver the sequel first. How's that? Because I'm starting to do errata, and people are like, dude, get to work. My wife is asking me a question. It's like, you couldn't ask me in the car. You have to ask me now.
Between your self-published edition and the hardcover, is there any difference between the two books?
Boy, that's such a plan. It's like times are changing, man. It's like the question that she knows the answer to was, is there any difference between the self-published edition and the Dutton hardcover edition? And there is. That's actually a good point. You're steering me back to this. Dutton was amazingly cool. I was shocked that I did this self-published book, and about 97% of it is exactly the way I wrote it, which amazes me that it survived. And Ben Sevier is one of the best editors in New York. He's great. They only wanted me to change the first chapter, because my first chapter in the self-published, or the Lena Zierhaus edition, was somewhat technical. It took place in a server room, people talking about machines. They said, well, we'd like to make this a mainstream commercial thriller. Could we possibly have it start some other way? And I already had a different beginning that I had abandoned, put it back in place that was much more, the non-technical reader wouldn't have to climb over a barbed wire fence to get into the story, basically. That was one change. Another was that they wanted to add a chapter somewhere around the middle, which I'd also written. So I knew that we were thinking in the same way. But those are the only changes, really, which, once again, shocked me. To go through a mainstream publishing company almost entirely intact in what I was trying to say was great. So, yes.
Did you have an editor before you self-published the book?
No, self-edited. I like to think I have a stainless steel ego, so I can be honest with myself. What I would do is I would write this, put it down for a month, come back to it, and then I could realistically look at it without being emotionally attached to any sentence and say, oh, that's crap. I write big and then sort of sculpt the ultimate book out of it. I overwrite. And that really requires some cutting. Like I said, I was on page 1135 at one point. I got rid of whole storylines, whole characters, which seemed like great ideas at the time, but just didn't pan out. But yeah, it's a lot of self-editing. Yeah. there's another one over here, yes.
Yeah, if you were born like 75 years ago, before there were any computers, what do you think you'd be writing about now?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. The question was, if I was born 75 years earlier, what would I be writing about? Wow, I don't know. Steam engines on ships or something? I'm interested in technology and its effect on society, its transformative effect on society. I suspect it would be something like that. I don't know if it would be as fun, because I might be far more obscure. I feel very fortunate with what's happened in this. And how this blew up was largely because of technology, how instantly information can move. But I would still be doing this type of thing, I think, at this point in my life, because I was ready for a change. I spent a lot of time really in server rooms, writing a lot of code, and I just, was ready for change. And fortunately, this came along. So I don't know, if it was 1870 and I was at that point, and still alive, by the way, because I guess I'd be, what was the average lifespan in 1870s? I probably, not high. So I'd be preparing to retire and die, probably, at this point. I don't think people had second careers too much in those days. There was another one over there. Anybody? Yes.
So are you right now a full-time professional writer, or are you still writing code?
Okay, am I a full-time writer now? For probably the next couple of years, yeah. I will never leave technology entirely. I want to do some technology entrepreneurship now, do some other things. I could never leave it alone, pretty much. I always start to get involved in things, and I find myself tinkering with machines again and again. But I also have this desire to write. I've always had it my entire life. I've written a lot, and I like to think this is really the only time anybody's noticed that I write. And so I'll trade off between those. I don't necessarily want to be a person who produces a book a year no matter what, like if I don't have something to say. If I don't have something to say, I won't do a book. So right now I'm a professional writer. That's probably going to change. But did you have a question?
When you go through the self-editing cycle, how do you know when you're done?
It's not entirely true that it's just self-editing. I do have friends, writers who I respect, who will viciously attack what I write. And I would much rather that, because I know that they're doing it from a good point, because you only have that one chance to throw it out there. But I will do my best at self-editing it. And I don't know, I just tend to know it. If I put it down several times and come back to it, and nothing in it jars me or takes me out, basically, if it suspends disbelief for me, if it kind of weaves that spell that brings you into a story where you forget you're reading, then that works for me. And then somebody else will really tear into it. And I won't necessarily agree with some of their comments, but I've been fortunate so far that I think I've agreed where I needed to. I don't know how I arrive at that, but I just seem to. So, again? No, I'm gonna call him.
How did an English major end up being a database guy?
Yeah, it's interesting. Well, first of all, work in publishing and realize how much they pay. No, just kidding. I was, production assistant. Sorry. I'd always been interested in technology, and not to offend anybody at all, I probably won't, but I think there is an art in some ways to technology. To look at systems, very often I would be able to make rapid progress on a system because I sort of understood all of the parties involved and what they were trying to achieve. And I think that's a big part of making good technology is, tight code is good, but having it meet the needs of what people want, being able to adequately communicate to them and with them and understand what it is they're trying to achieve. I think having an English literature or a written word background helped me a lot there. So I think that's how it is. And of course, I got certs and other things like that later on. No computer engineering degree, but that turned out not to be as necessary as a good decade or so of experience, especially at that very formulative stage, early 90s going all the way up from there. That was a big, big time for people just grabbing tools and working with them. Getting certs, true, but I would never design hardware, for instance. I would never attempt to do that. But anyway, learn by doing. Yes, Rick.
Andrew in Pittsburgh has a question.
Okay, Andrew in Pittsburgh. You got the shirt
Hi,
for
how are you guys? Quick question. In a couple different points of the book, at least one that I can remember specifically, you describe very specifically and technically certain exploits, right? And I know that that's so much of the buzz and talk around this publication is, a very, very commercially accessible, for the layman, technical thriller that's not dumbed down. Have there been any anecdotal, stories that you've come across of people going, oh, you know what, I tried this thing that I didn't really understand that you wrote in your book and on my favorite website, holy cow, For example, you described like a SQL injection attack.
That's right.
With an actual snippet there. Is that, any anecdotal sort of stories there of people actually giving that a whirl and coming across, well, it wasn't as easy as you described, or two, do you feel any responsibility for sort of putting things out there that...
For sowing chaos.
In the hands of, yeah, right.
I thought about that pretty hard. Some of those hacks I actually made a tweak to so that I could clearly demonstrate that it was a real one, but it wouldn't give you enough information without you going to pursue it to achieve it. You'd also have to have some considerable knowledge already. I like to think that adversaries of civilization, people who want to sow chaos, already know these things, who have the technological bent to be hackers. What I was trying to do was make people aware of these vulnerabilities commonly so that people can realize the fragility of the modern world. That was really what I was going for. I don't think I created or enabled any new enemies of the system, so to speak. And where I thought it might be too easy, like for instance, the SQL injection attack. I sound elitist like this, but if you have an entry form on your webpage that's susceptible to a SQL injection attack, my God, man, that's a pretty common one. And I chose the most common SQL injection attack in that text. So, you should already have fixed that. And I was also very careful. I know, it's like, that's it, you get what you deserve. Now, I also was careful in my descriptions of machines to talk about unpatched machines, people who were using pirated code, who weren't maintaining. I didn't want to give a false impression that no matter what you did, that you were helpless. So, some capable systems maintenance and would solve almost all of that, and I didn't choose things that were commonly known already. I mean, like for instance, a net BIOS attack. That's going back a ways. Almost all machines are going to be protected against that now. But it did help to communicate that there are ports in a machine, and you get people who are non-techie, you say, really? And they look on the back of the machine, for ports. It's like, no, it's not like that. And hopefully that helped them a little to understand that there are code ports in your machine that you have to be concerned about, if not exactly net BIOS assault, something like that type of attack. So I hope that answered your question. Yeah, I'm not trying to sow anarchy. Sorry. All right. Yes, Eric.
What part of the book did you have the most fun writing?
Oh, boy. What part of the book did I have most fun writing? Would it upset anyone if I said it's fun to write for Greg, who's a character who's very disturbing? Actually, that's what the Hollywood people told me, too, was your heroes are kind of bland, but your villains are great. It's like, what does that say about you? Well, I don't know. But no, he was an interesting character to write for. Because I tried not to make anybody black or white in terms of their evil or goodness. I tried to make this shades of gray. Certainly, he is a very bad person, but he has his reasons that I don't necessarily agree with, but he does have his reasons. So it would be Greg. Yes, Michelle.
What was the inspiration behind Daemon?
Oh, see, this is just so transparent. These people, this is a sophisticated audience here. My wife feeding me another question. What was the inspiration behind the story? Actually, it's true. I forgot this. It was a program that I wrote, actually, in 1999, and it was not a program to take over the world. It was a program called Weathermaster, which created fictional weather for fictional worlds. It was for role-playing gamers. If you didn't know there was a market for such a thing, there is. And I wrote it as a sideline because at the time I was doing some really dry database design work and I wanted a challenge. So I created this program and it had a really cool orbital mechanics module in it too. So you could create a custom world with a axis tilt, orbital eccentricity, and it would determine when the sun would rise and set anywhere on that world in any day of the year. And it would create weather and all that stuff. So I wrapped it in a licensing control. It's like a polymorphic encryption wrapper. Made it available over to the web so you could pull it down, try it for 30 days, and if you liked it, you bought it. The money went automatically into this merchant account, and the merchant account was swept to pay for the website and advertising and things like that. It's a completely automated system. And I went away, I got busy on some client projects, and I came back a couple months later, and there's this money in this account, you know, and I sold into 38 countries. And that was probably the first time I realized the power of the web, like, oh my God, it's like I don't even have to be alive for this thing to keep running. And then I started thinking what else I could do if I was dead. And I realized, like, I could do most of what I do already if I was dead, because most of our communications are not personal. They're very impersonal. We communicate with sort of an avatar of ourselves, email, or you go onto a web page to do your online banking or to order things. And I started ticking off this list of all this stuff. And then I realized, well, if I was also a corporation and I paid my bills, you know, you could continue, especially if you start to have adherents that start to work for you. So that's how this story grew out of that. So actually, that was good to feed me that. I forgot to bring that up. But anyway, I thought I had another one here. Rick.
So you introduced the possibility late in the book, and I'm not giving away spoilers for those who haven't read
Okay.
it, about the Daemon as a platform, where Sobel anticipates other platforms emerging.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I was a little surprised by was that in a world where open source communities basically create themselves around certain platforms,
Yep.
that we didn't see a group recognize the Daemon for what it was
Mm-hmm.
and try and exploit it themselves
Okay.
outside of the Daemon's own control.
See, that's good, because see, when you read the sequel now. Because, yes, that is very true, that such a system that's so pervasive would start to have people tugging in different directions and putting it to uses that the creator could not have ever anticipated. Any sufficiently useful tool would be like that. And yeah, you're dead on right. And that's much of what the sequel deals with. I'm not trying to evade, that's really the truth. So, yes, Erica.
What technology are you most interested in right now?
Social networking is interesting to me. The power of that, and also how it aggregates information about real-time human activity, I think is fascinating. I talked about this a little in the Long Now presentation I did. There was a study at MIT called reality mining, I think it was called, where they studied the movements of cell phones, for instance. And this isn't strictly social networking, but it's tracking the movements of people and seeing how they connect. And then they wrote an algorithm, and this is after about a month. They wrote an algorithm that could predict with 85% accuracy what someone was going to do next. Anybody in that study. I thought, that's really powerful. That type of thing is very interesting to me. I'm a civil liberties kind of guy, but at the same time, I also understand the need to collect information to make movement of goods and services efficient. So it's balancing that. I think that balancing act and how we preserve democracy while doing it, that is right at the center of what I'm interested in. So, yes?
As I understand, your sequel is finished, so what are you working on now?
No, I am working on the sequel still. Like I said, I was mostly done with it. And then when I made the deal with Dutton, I went back and revisited it towards the structure apart a bit, because there has been a lot of things in recent months that have changed that I wanted to incorporate.
What are you planning to do then once you're done with the sequel?
I'm not going to keep writing a series of Daemon books right now. I don't want to continue the story. And basically, I'm going to finish what it was that I wanted to say. If in the future there's something that I think is good to add to it, sure, I might do that. But I have a third book that I want to do, completely separate subject. And then also, like I said, get involved in technology. There's some ideas, some technologies I'm very interested in. But that type of thing. Anybody else? Yes?
I guess, what is it like, so now expectations are much higher than they
Yeah,
were before.
that's right.
So I guess, what does this do to your writing process?
Okay, and once again, I'm sorry for not repeating these questions, because I don't know that we have a mic that will detect the questions. But the question was, now that this book appears to be successful, is the pressure on not to suck on the next one? Yeah, it is, but what's helpful here is that I knew what I wanted to do from the beginning. So I'm just going to do that, and damn the torpedoes, that type of thing. I can't really worry about that. I think I just have to write the book that I want to read, which is what I did with the first one, and whoever finds that interesting will find it interesting, and that's all I can do. Yes?
What some of your favorite reads are?
Neil Stephenson. of Neil Stephenson, Andre Norton, Isaac Asimov Foundation trilogy, things like that. A lot of nonfiction. Also John Dos Passos. Anybody know John Dos Passos, Portuguese writer, the America trilogy? He's great, from the 1920s. I have really wide-ranging interests. Lately, though, because of research, I've been reading a ton of nonfiction. Almost all of the authors I cannot think of. Oh, well, no, Jared Diamond, people like that. What is it, Michael Pollan? You know, things like that. I read a lot of different stuff, which is great. Love books, love books.
Just put a list on your website.
Yeah, you know, I probably should put a list on my website. P.W. Singer's another guy who writes for like a think tank, and he writes these really incisive books about corporate military and technology. Really, yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that. So I'm not going to make a note now, but.
One more question.
Okay.
Sort of on the democratization of information and technology, I guess. With news in the last few months of terror attacks in India, other places, and things like Google Earth Maps and other things being
Yes,
used for that.
to plan those attacks.
What's your thinking on that, about countries trying to block those things?
Yeah.
Or to make those
Basically trying to control the web after the fact. That sort of goes along the lines of what I was saying to Erica about, you know, front and center, my concern about information and how it's gathered and used, who uses it. I think there's a real risk, not just from terrorists or other people using this information, but also from governments tugging it in the other direction to control and become gatekeepers of information. I don't know, I'm really of the opinion that right about in the middle is a nice balancing point between security and openness is the best we can do. Because you look at nature, it said, you know, how many hundreds of millions of years to evolve systems to try to survive attacked by external forces, and it is not perfect, even so. The immune system works, by and large, but it can still be defeated. So we still walk around not in bubble suits. We accept some risk, and I think that to be a free person, you have to just accept some risks. You're right to say we shouldn't make it easy. We should build in some safeguards, but I think in coming years we will find that balance. I don't know exactly how we'll do it, but having a conversation like this is probably a good start. So, anyone else? Yes?
So, obviously, it worked out really well for you. I'm just wondering, how did you decide to self-publish a hard copy on paper instead of distributing this through the web?
Yeah, actually, okay, the question is, being a technologist, why did I decide to publish this on paper? This goes into some of my feelings about e-readers. You know, having just recently purchased a Kindle, I mean, I can see that, and I think Rick and I talked about this. It's like you want to read a 1,200-page biography of Abraham Lincoln, but you're getting on a plane. You know, it's good to be able to combine it into a digital format. It's easy to carry. Some of the arguments about e-readers being better for the environment, I'm not sure I buy that. I mean, you've got, what is it, gadolinium arsenide circuit boards, I think that's the name of it, lead solder, you got the plastic, you got the LCD screens. How many years are you going to keep it? How much energy was required to make it versus a book? So the environmental concerns, I'm not sure I buy exactly. I don't know if it's a wash, if one is better than the other. Also, having a proprietary format, electronic format, that our literature, the corpus of our society is stored in, that concerns me a little too. It's not necessarily heading in that direction just now, but I would be concerned if 30, 40 years from now we have some of our literature on this standard, some of it on that standard. I would want to see it all, pardon me, all open. So I don't know, I thought my favorite way to read a book is physically. Pick it up off a shelf, read it. As I start to become more comfortable with e-readers, that might change, but for right now, I did it because that's the way I like to read a book. And that's all, even though I'm a technologist, you know.
Andrew in Pittsburgh again.
Oh, Andrew in Pittsburgh, hello.
Yeah, hey. So I wanted to touch real quickly, get back on the sort of technical competency of the book.
Sure.
So you touch on a lot of different disciplines, you know, sometimes in a great detail, sometimes just hinting at, and cover a lot of, you know, everything from CS and all the disciplines there within to hardware engineering to, you know, electrical engineering and even mechanical engineering in different portions. How much of this technology did you have sort of hands-on experience on that you were able to draw from, and how much did you research enough to sort of feel comfortable writing about it? And again, I'm, you know, certainly not an expert in all the things you talk about, but, you know, the thing that struck me is so much of it seemed plausible, and a handful of things that, you know, I've had a chance to see or do that were mentioned in the book. I'm like, wow, it's seems pretty dead on, and not everyone's got a chance to see that kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, okay, that's a good question. I'm one of those people who I like to think I know what I know, and I'm not afraid to say I don't know something. You know, when you're in a meeting with somebody and they just will not admit that they don't know something, it drives me crazy. I don't know, for instance, what is in the utility belts of the FBI's elite hostage rescue unit, or what explosives they carry. So I read a lot of books to find out what they do. I read a lot of Bamford on the NSA, how they talk to each other, how their systems work. When it comes to database systems, networks, I was fairly comfortable with that. Also, oddly, commercial real estate. For instance, when they're going through the plenum of that building, I used to be a commercial real estate manager, so I knew that. But anything I didn't know, just the way I am, I wanted to know more about it and get it right. And so I went through the very enjoyable process, by the way, of reading books about it. I love that. It would give me an excuse to read a book about a subject I really might not have covered otherwise. So reading lots. That abbreviated reading list at the back of the book is indeed abbreviated. There's probably about 4 or 5 dozen books that I read to write this book. So it's actually interesting if you think about it. It's like how literature builds one on another. Nonfiction, feeding fiction, and so on. Yeah, I think that's what I did. All right. Yes, Erica.
Did you write anything really before Daemon?
Did I write anything before Daemon? Yeah, I used to write stories just to amuse myself. I did write some screenplays, but I think everyone does that. They're around, and I should destroy them as soon as possible. I have a feeling. Same thing with my first novel that I never finished in college, which, man, I tried to read that recently. I was really self-indulgent and full of myself. You know, it's like a 20-year-old guy writing a book, and I know everything, you know. So I got to destroy that, too. Thank you for bringing that up. Lest I die and somebody try to publish it. So, yeah, I've written a lot of things, but I never really got serious about getting it published or getting it out there, let's say, until this one.
Or like short stories or anything you wrote previously?
I have some short stories floating around. I've always wondered, what is the market for short stories? I mean, I know there is one. And maybe that's changing, so I don't mean to offend anybody who writes short stories, but I don't know. I just wanted to, I felt really passionate about this, and it's not like I had a lot of free time. So when I took this amount of time that I was going to take, I wanted to see that it would reach a broad audience. So I wrote this really mainstream commercial thriller to try to get all these people thinking about it.
Would you possibly consider releasing your short stories in an open format, like a text file on your website?
Would I consider releasing my short stories in an open format on a website? I haven't read them in so long. If they're good, I think some of them probably, because, you know, most of those I wrote 10 years or more ago, and about some pretty bizarre subjects. So, yeah, you know, I'm not somebody who absolutely has to make money on everything I write. Certainly, if it's interesting, I think it's relevant, especially to this type. Like, for instance, if I'm a techno thriller author now and I'm putting out rhyming couplets about squirrels, that will disappoint some folks. It's like, wow, that guy's weird. Oh, sorry. Yes, my wife is getting upset. So, anybody else? Any other questions? Oh, what? What did I do? What?
What type, I know a lot of people ask this question about, since you were a consultant, you worked a lot, I mean, when did you write? What, did you carve out time? You were very disciplined, or, you know, when and how did you
So my wife's
write this
trying
book?
to get me to talk about how I wrote this thing. I wrote this book in the evenings, sometimes in the middle of the night, and usually after something happened that got me back to it, like some sort of technological event, either a release of a worm or something like that, or something that I saw that really spurred me to do it. So there were a lot of catalytic moments for me that got me moving on it. But it was in the twilight hours or on weekends that I wrote the book. So.
Did you write it?
Hmm?
Did you write it on a computer, typewriter, by hand?
I wrote it on a computer. I'm trying to think here. Now, you guys offer a word processor, so I'll be guarded as I say this, but honestly, I wrote it in Word, because that's what I use with my clients to exchange data. And then I typeset it in Word, and then eventually that was used to create the physical book by Dutton. I was really surprised, but it was a very efficient process, just out it went. Rick, One more. Did you have a question, or were you just stretching?
No, I had a question. Any thoughts about the dividing line between techno-thrillers and science fiction?
Yeah.
You mentioned Neil Stephenson, who actually writes techno-thrillers, but they're marketed as science fiction.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is talking about techno-thrillers and science fiction and what that demarcation might be. This book, Daemon, has been described as science fiction by some people, and I sort of bridle when they do that. And it's not because I perceive science fiction as some sort of literary ghetto. It's because I think it's much closer to reality than that. Yeah, you could say it's science fiction, but it wouldn't be science fiction for very long, I would anticipate. Because what I've done is combine some very real technologies in just new ways. I haven't said there's a fusion energy drive that goes to the stars, that type of thing. So that's how I think of science fiction. I don't know, I wouldn't say that this is science fiction. And some people might disagree, but I don't. So, can I get one more? Okay.
So, to me, like, the mark of something good is when people start pirating it all over the place. So,
Imitation is the most sincere form of flattery, that type of thing.
So your book is very good, it's
Oh, thank you.
On the MIT bestsellers list. So, what will your reaction be when it begins to get pirated because of it?
Well, as long as they do a good job, I suppose. I don't want it to change such that what it was. Basically, the more people who are thinking about these issues, and if it starts a public discussion, a mainstream discussion about the reliability and the sustainability of our infrastructure, the way we're building it, and balancing efficiency with survivability, great. I'm happy, man. Besides, it's been wonderful so far. I've been very fortunate. I've been able to take a couple years now to write. I would not be crestfallen. I know it's going to happen. Hopefully it's not, for a bad purpose. I would be very upset if my book was somehow changed or people used it for a bad purpose. As Andrew from Pittsburgh might have mentioned, it would upset me if something bad happened. But at the same time, those openings were already there and are already publicized in many, many places where people look for such information. So, I don't think I would be responsible for it. But anyway, so here I'll vacate my post
No,
here.
stay
Oh,
here.
I'm staying.
So, you have a number of fans of the book, and two of them couldn't make it today. One, Matt Cutts, is on his way to a conference, so he sends his regards. The other is Chris DeBona, who manages our open source initiatives at Google.
Cool.
And he was all excited. He had read the self-published version and
Oh,
was
cool.
really excited to be here, but is on a plane. But he wanted to give a thank you gift, which is one of the Android dev phones.
Cool.
So you get to
That's so cool.
You get to hack around with.
Oh, man, I'll tell you, I didn't expect this. Oh,
open
I'm
source
psyched.
phone and,
Hey, thank you.
Yeah.
My God.
So Chris
Awesome.
definitely wanted you to know that he was a big fan and was very sorry
Excellent.
he couldn't be here.
Great.
So,
And now we won't have any time to spend together because I'm going to be playing with this. Wow.
so Dan, thank you again.
No,
Thank you for
thank
coming
you so
out.
much. Thank you, everybody. Cool.